Hey everyone, welcome to another deep dive with me.
I'm here too.
Right, of course. Haha. Well, today we're diving into some excerpts from a really interesting book,
Oh yeah, what's it called?
The Psychology of Addiction by Jenny Svanberg.
I've heard of that one. Seems pretty popular.
Yeah, it's gotten some buzz.
Oh.
And for good reason, I think.
I've heard it's got a lot of controversial stuff in it.
Well, that's what we're here to find out, right? See what this book has to say.
Yeah.
One of the things that really stood out to me in the intro was
Wow.
the whole thing about how most people who recover from addiction actually do it without formal treatment, like without going to rehab or anything.
Really? That's interesting.
Yeah. It really makes you wonder what's going on there, right? Like what makes us vulnerable to addiction in the first place
Right.
and what helps people get better. So that's what we're going to explore today.
Sounds good to me. Let's dive in.
Okay, so the book kind of starts out by challenging some of those, like,
Yeah.
black and white ideas about addiction. Like, it's just a choice.
Oh, right. Yeah. The whole moral failing thing.
Exactly.
So, I'm really glad that Svanberg tackles that right off the bat because it's so important to understand that addiction is so much more complex than that. There are all these psychological and neurological factors at play.
Totally. So if it's not just like a simple choice, like what is going on in our brains when we talk about addiction?
Well, the book uses this idea of a spectrum of addictive behaviors.
Okay, a spectrum.
Yeah, like picture this.
Okay.
We all exist somewhere on this spectrum, right? It's
Yeah.
not just you're addicted or you're not addicted.
So even someone who like enjoys a glass of wine every night is somewhere on that spectrum.
Exactly. It's all about like recognizing those patterns and how intense the behaviors are and how much they impact our lives.
That makes sense. It's not so much about the substance itself, but more about our relationship to it, I guess.
Exactly. And the book even uses this really like powerful image to illustrate this point from Tibetan Buddhism, the idea of hungry ghosts.
Hungry ghosts. Okay, that sounds kind of spooky.
Well, yeah. So picture this. You've got these beings with these like huge appetites, but tiny mouths. So they can never really satisfy their hunger. They're always craving more. And that's what addiction is kind of like.
Like you're constantly chasing something that can never truly fill that underlying need.
Yeah. Like think about someone with a gambling addiction.
Okay.
They might be chasing that thrill of a win.
Right.
But that feeling is always fleeting, right? So they end up needing to gamble more and more and more to experience it again.
Wow. I can see how that would just become this like never-ending cycle.
Yeah, exactly. It's like that with so many different addictions. Always chasing that initial high, but never quite reaching it.
That's a really powerful way to think about it. I mean, it makes sense, right? If it's about this like deep need, like you said, then why doesn't everyone who uses drugs or alcohol get addicted?
That's where things get even more interesting. We got to look at the neuroscience of addiction.
Ooh, brain stuff. I love brain stuff.
It's fascinating. Think about this. Like how you can lose hours scrolling on your phone even when you know you should be doing something else.
Guilty as charged.
Right. We've all been there. But it happens because those repeated actions create neural pathways in your brain, right? And with addiction, those pathways get like super reinforced with powerful rewards, relief from pain, all that stuff. It makes them really tough to break free from.
Oh, wow. So those pathways get stronger and stronger the more you engage in the behavior.
Exactly. It's like the book uses the analogy of a path in the woods.
Oh, I like that.
Right. The more you walk that path,
the
more defined it becomes.
Makes sense.
And it's the same with these neural pathways related to addiction. The more we engage in that behavior, the more ingrained that path becomes.
So for some people, are those paths like super highways of addiction?
Yeah, basically. And that's where individual vulnerability comes in. The book talks about how genetics play a role, of course, our environment, but what really stuck with me was how much early childhood experiences can impact this.
So you mean like if someone experienced trauma or neglect as a child?
Exactly. The book talks about how those types of experiences can leave someone much more sensitive to stress and just have a greater need for ways to cope,
Right.
It doesn't automatically mean that everyone who faces adversity is going to become addicted.
Yeah, of course.
But it definitely creates a vulnerability.
I see. So it's like their brains might be wired to be constantly seeking out ways to feel safe or in control.
Right. Exactly. Imagine growing up in a chaotic or unpredictable environment.
Yeah.
That could really impact how your brain develops and how you respond to stress later in life.
And lead to using those addictive behaviors as a way to cope.
Exactly. Svanberg actually gives an example in the book about a woman she treated who had a history of childhood abuse.
Oh, wow.
And this woman, she developed a shopping addiction as a way to cope with these really intense feelings of emptiness and loneliness. That's so sad. But it makes sense in a way. Like, shopping can give you this temporary sense of control and fulfillment, right?
Right. It's all about finding ways to soothe those difficult emotions. And for some people, those ways can become addictive.
So it sounds like early trauma can really lay the groundwork for addiction to take root later on.
It's definitely a significant factor, yeah.
This is all really heavy stuff, but I'm curious,
Yeah.
does understanding all this, the brain science, the vulnerability, does it actually help us deal with addiction in a better way?
I think it's crucial.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. The book argues that we need to move away from blaming individuals and towards understanding the bigger picture, all the systemic factors that contribute to addiction.
So instead of asking, what's wrong with you, it's more like, what happened to you?
Yeah.
What do you need?
Exactly. It's about shifting from judgment to compassion.
I love that.
And that's really at the heart of the recovery movement that the book explores.
Okay. Well, I'm definitely ready to hear more about that. So this whole recovery movement thing, it's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, I'm really intrigued by that.
Yeah. It's like recovery isn't this solo journey, you know?
Right.
It's something we do together as a society.
Yeah.
And that involves changing how we see and support people who are facing addiction.
I love that. Okay, so thinking about the people who do recover, often without formal help even, what makes that possible? What's happening for them?
Well, the book spends some time on the psychology of recovery.
Okay.
And it's not just about stopping the behavior.
Yeah.
It's about rewiring those neural pathways.
Oh, right.
Learning new coping skills, building healthier habits.
So it's like creating a new path in that forest analogy.
Exactly, you got it.
Yeah.
And it takes incredible strength and resilience to do that.
Oh, absolutely.
The book shares this story about a man who struggled with heroin addiction for years.
Wow.
Yeah. And he finally hit rock bottom and decided to get clean.
Good for him.
Yeah. He went through intense withdrawal, therapy, support groups, you name it.
It's a long road.
Yeah. But what really helped him stay sober
Oh, yeah.
was finding a new passion, running marathons.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
Yeah. So he replaced his addiction with something positive and challenging.
So inspiring. It really shows that recovery is about transformation, you know?
Absolutely.
Like becoming a new person in a way.
Yeah.
And it seems like supportive relationships play a huge role in that too, right? Like
Yeah.
the book talks about how important communities are for recovery.
Totally. Communities are everything. Recovery is often about connection, finding people who understand your struggles and can offer encouragement and support.
Yeah.
It's about breaking through the stigma and isolation that so often surrounds addiction, you know?
Right, right.
Svenberg talks about how important it is for people in recovery to find a sense of belonging.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and that can be through support groups, therapy, or even just connecting with friends and family who are understanding and supportive.
Yeah, absolutely. Having that safe space to be vulnerable.
Exactly. She gives the example of a woman she treated who was struggling with alcohol addiction. Okay.
And this woman, she was initially really hesitant to tell her family about her struggles.
It can be so hard to open up about that stuff.
Right. But when she finally did open up, she was surprised by how much love and support she received from them.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. And that support network became so crucial in her recovery journey.
Makes you think about how we often call addiction a disease.
Mm-hmm.
But the book seems to question whether that disease model is always the most helpful way to think about it.
That's a really key point. I mean, the disease model has done a lot to reduce stigma around addiction.
Yeah.
But it can also make addiction seem like this permanent thing.
Right.
Like something you're just powerless against. And for a lot of people, that's just not true.
So how do we rethink addiction in a way that empowers people?
Well, the book pushes for a more holistic approach.
Yeah.
One that acknowledges the interplay of all these factors, biology, psychology, and social factors.
Right.
It's about understanding each person's individual story, you know? So it's like instead of just focusing on the symptoms of addiction, we need to look at the whole person.
Yeah, exactly. Like what led them to this point in their lives? What are their strengths, you know?
Right. Seeing the whole person, not just the addiction.
And recognizing that recovery isn't one size fits all.
Of course not.
Some people find support in 12-step programs,
Right.
Others in therapy or peer support groups, or spirituality even.
Right.
The book really emphasizes that recovery is a journey.
Yeah, not a destination.
Exactly. There might be setbacks along the way, but the important thing is to keep moving forward, keep learning and growing.
I love that perspective. It really highlights the power of resilience and the fact that there are so many different paths to healing.
And it challenges us to create communities that support that resilience, right? Communities that help people find their own unique path to a good life.
Yeah. It's about building a safety net where people feel seen and supported, not judged.
Absolutely. But that makes me wonder, how do we actually put these ideas into action? How do we go beyond just talking about compassion?
That's the million-dollar question.
And that's where the book gets really interesting. It dives into the world of drug policy.
Ooh, okay.
And looks at how our societal responses to addiction can either help or hinder recovery.
Now, this is where things get real.
Yeah. So the book really takes aim at the traditional, war on drugs approach.
Yeah.
You know, the one that focuses so much on punishment and prohibition.
Right.
And it argues that this approach has actually been counterproductive.
Really? I mean, that seems kind of counterintuitive.
I know, right? You'd think that cracking down on drugs would reduce addiction.
Yeah.
But the book presents all this evidence that it often does the opposite.
Interesting.
Like criminalizing drug use just pushes people to the margins of society.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Makes it harder to access support and treatment.
Right.
And it also creates this dangerous black market where drugs are totally unregulated.
Oh, for sure.
Svanberg brings up a really good point about how when people are afraid of the legal consequences, they're less likely to seek help when they need it.
Right. Like they're afraid of getting in trouble with the law.
Exactly. She gives this example of imagine someone overdoses at a party.
Okay. Yeah.
And everyone's worried about getting arrested.
Yeah.
So they hesitate to call for help.
Oh, wow. That's scary.
Right. And that could have really fatal consequences.
Definitely. It all comes back to stigma, doesn't it?
It totally does. If we see drug users as criminals instead of as people who are struggling and need help, then we're less likely to offer them that help.
So true. So the book is advocating for kind of a shift away from that punishment model.
Exactly. Moving towards something that's more compassionate, a more health-centered model.
Okay. So what would that look like in practice? What kind of policies would actually help support people in recovery and reduce harm?
The book explores a bunch of alternative approaches that are being tried around the world.
Okay.
Things like decriminalization,
Okay.
harm reduction programs, investing in better treatment and support services.
That all makes sense. I know Portugal decriminalized all drugs back in 2001.
Yeah.
What's been the impact of that?
Well, the results have been pretty remarkable.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Drug use hasn't exploded like people feared.
Interesting.
And rates of addiction and drug-related deaths have actually gone down significantly.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah. Svanberg talks about how Portugal really shifted their focus from punishing drug users to actually helping them.
Yeah.
Providing support and treatment.
So they're treating it more as a health issue.
Exactly. And they've put a lot of resources into harm reduction programs.
Like what kind of programs?
Things like needle exchanges and safe consumption sites.
Right.
And these programs have actually been shown to reduce the spread of diseases and prevent overdoses.
That's great. So by addressing it from a public health perspective, they've actually made things better for everyone.
It really has. And it just underscores the main message of the book, that compassion, understanding, and focusing on people's actual needs.
Right.
That's the most effective way to deal with addiction.
So powerful. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are some key takeaways for our listeners? The book argues that addiction often stems from these unmet needs. Needs for connection, for purpose, for relief from pain.
Right.
What does this tell us about the kind of society we should be striving to create?
It's a really crucial question. How do we build a world that truly supports people's well-being?
Right.
How do we address those underlying needs in healthy ways? Svanberg challenges us to really examine the messages we send about success and happiness and about how to cope with difficult emotions. Like, do we value connection and compassion and authenticity?
Yeah.
Or are we more focused on material wealth and individual achievement?
I see what you mean. That's a really big challenge.
It is, but it's also a huge opportunity, right? An opportunity to build communities where everyone feels a sense of belonging and support.
I love that. So it's not just about changing individual behavior, right? It's about changing the systems that contribute to addiction in the first place.
Exactly. And remember, recovery is possible.
Yes.
It's a journey, and there will be challenges along the way.
Of course.
But there's always hope, always the possibility of healing and transformation.
So true. So to all our listeners out there, keep exploring, keep learning, and don't be afraid to reach out for support.
You're not alone on this journey.
For sure. Well, we highly recommend checking out The Psychology of Addiction by Jenny Svanberg if you're interested in learning more.
It's a really thought-provoking book.
It is. It'll definitely challenge your assumptions about addiction.
And give you a much deeper understanding of this complex issue.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks everyone.